Mike, Brooke, what one thing do you wish you'd have known 10 years ago?
Gosh, it really kind of made me really look back over my career. And I guess that's the point that there's no, I wish I could have said to myself 10 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago, that the perfect career path doesn't exist. Changing roles, changing industries, changing to opportunities, it's positive. It's all right. It's not a negative. Don't look at it as a negative. It's about experience. It's about kind of discovery. It's about inquisitiveness, you know? So I think for me, I've kind of probably beaten myself up a little bit, been a bit hard on myself 10, 15 years ago, you know, particularly. And I look back now and go, do you know what? That was all right. That's given me, you know, all the experiences that I've got that's helped shape my career. It's helped shape me as a person, that sort of diversity skills and experience. I value that now. At the time, I was worried about what recruiters would think or what business owners would think, you know, and kind of, oh, you were there and then you were there and you did that. And now I kind of wear it as a bit of a sort of stripes on my, you know, on my sleeve or badges on my kind of top, if you like. So yeah, it's kind of, I do wish I could have kind of had that word with myself, sat on my shoulder and gone, dude, it's all right. It's good.
So there's a guy in Belfast called David Mead, one of the greatest presenters I've ever seen. And David describes innovation as really simply old or new ideas delivered in an old or new way.
Yeah.
And if you think about that for a second, and I know you didn't talk about innovation, but just think about that for a minute, old or new ideas delivered in an old or new way. There is something about, and I understand why people in industry, when they're recruiting, want to recruit someone from that industry who's got 10 years experience, because depending on what you're trying to do, someone coming with 10, 15, 20 years experience has learned all those lessons and can shortcut you to where
Yeah.
you want to get to. Absolutely. But what that does do is it means everything you get tends to be the same as everything that's already happened. So if you
Yeah.
want to do something different, you need someone whose career looks a little bit squigglier, because their old or new ideas in one sector look like new ideas in a different
Yeah.
sector. So if you've spent your whole career in automotive and then you move into retail, you go look into retail and you're like, why the hell do you do it that way? And you
Yeah.
start to bring in ideas that really worked in one sector. Now, not everything is just lift and shift transferable, but that different time in different industries and different sectors can be really valuable when you bring
Yeah.
into something new and something different. And it stops you doing what I call straight line thinking. Well, problem
Yeah.
A, the answer must be answer B. That's it. And that's what you kind of get when someone's just spent the whole life in one sector. Oh, yeah, no, answer that, boom.
Yeah, no,
Is it
absolutely.
the
I
answer?
agree. Like, you know, it's kind of like personally, I now, you know, kind of just celebrate the fact that I've had that opportunity and still continue to have that opportunity to look at different clients, look at different industries, look at different challenges. At Made Brave, we are quite industry agnostic. And, you know, we've always said, just like you're saying there, there's different things that you can take from it, from you know, even from the extremes of, we work with whiskey clients in Scotland, and we also work with global healthcare clients, which you would think are quite polar opposites of the healthcare world, if you like. And but there's so many things you can take from it. So yeah, I think that's always great. And for me as well, it became a bit of a sort of litmus test, really, of if they don't like that and they don't like that diversity of skills and experience and view on the world, then it's probably not the place for me anyway. And I suppose that's a little bit like the agency here as well, is that we're looking for clients that want to do something and think a bit differently and think a bit differently and, you know, come at a challenge from a different point of view.
I mean, the clue's in the name, right? You're at Made Brave. And I
Yeah.
think you've probably, it speaks to the sorts of clients you want to work with, right? You don't, I'm assuming from the name, you don't come to Made Brave and think, we just want some derivative work that everybody else has done. That's got to
Hopefully
be
not.
part of what you deliver, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Andrew, our founder, obviously will talk much more sort of eloquently about this, but, you know, he started the business 14, 15 years ago with £1,000 in the bank as his story, you know, so some called him stupid, some called him brave, Made Brave. And still to this day, brave means different things for different clients in different industries. What's brave in the whiskey world might not be so brave or different in the professional services world or for legal clients or renewable energy. We really work with a whole spectrum. It just, yeah, as you say, it's about that sort of just stepping forward and standing for something, being that little bit more distinctive or that little bit more differentiated, or just kind of spinning things on their heads completely. So yeah, it's not everything that we do absolutely, completely, sort of blows out the sort of creative kind of dust webs and wins awards. But for that client and that challenge and that opportunity, it's about pushing them forward. So that's the exciting thing.
Brilliant. Well, look, what a strong intro, Mike. After this introduction, we will come back and find out how you, as strategy director, help those clients achieve those goals. So back in 60 seconds with the rest of the interview with Mike. Hey up and welcome to the strategy sessions. My name is Andy Jarvis. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Eximo Marketing and also the host of this show. It's my pleasure today to talk to Mike Brooke. Mike is head of strategy at an agency in Scotland, and we talk about how Made Brave do things and how they work with their clients and some of the work that Mike's been involved with. It's a great discussion about how strategy works inside an agency and what that means for clients. If you're listening today and you think, oh, I know someone who might find that useful, send the episode to them. Please do. Just open that message. Get that message open now. If there was something in the beginning, type it out, send it, hit send. They'll love you for it. I'll love you for it. What more would you want to do? You can make me happy, you can make them happy, and you can bask in the glow of that. Right. Enough of that. Thank you if you do share the episode. Let's get back to the discussion with Mike. See you later. Mike, thank you for joining me on the strategy sessions. Great introduction there. Love chatting about careers and squiggly backgrounds to that. So tell us a little bit about your journey to strategy director at Made Brave, and maybe give us a bit of a sense of Made Brave as well when you get to that point.
Yeah, sure. So it is squiggly. I've 20 odd years experience. I stopped sort of saying the exact number once it got beyond 20. I don't know about you, but that sort of feels a bit scary. But yeah, I trained as a graphic designer originally. I sort of moved over to the dark side of kind of account management and marketing, trained myself up as a marketeer, and got really back into agencies over the last sort of 15 years. I have a mixture of client side and agency side brand marketing strategy experience. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I grew up, kind of just trying things out, watching what was going on, and sort of, I over the last sort of 15 years, I appreciated that strategy was a thing, planning was a thing. Classic ad world planning piece is interesting to me, but I always kind of liked the sort of mix of business, commercial, and brand and strategy in that sense. So that's kind of where I find myself today. I feel lucky that I'm in a role that kind of 15 years ago I wanted to get into, essentially. It's a mixture of brand strategy. It's a mixture of campaign strategy. We do a lot of kind of sort of culture work, employer brand work. So it's brand through the line, really. It's about brand creation, activation, sort of engaging people in those brands to build them from the inside out is one of our sort of mantras at Made Brave. I work for some of the senior clients, a mixture of clients. There's three of us in the strategy team, headed up by one of my colleagues, Mark, and another chap, Robbie. So yeah, we're a decent sized strategy team for Scotland. Scotland's quite a small place, but we'll talk more about kind of the fact that our clients are global clients. We work with people across the UK, in Scotland, of course, as well, but we've got clients in the US and across Europe as well. And Made Brave, we are a creative brand agency. We help people create brands. We build them from the inside out. We'll help them activate those and continue to grow them through brand creation all the way through to campaigns and advertising campaigns. We've got a real mixture of clients, which is amazing. We've got people like First Bus and First Group, which we recently rebranded, and we've been running campaigns with them for 6 or 7 years. We've got a couple of global medical device companies, pharma companies, drinks, energy, renewables, charities, you name it. We've got a real mixture, which is a really nice mix for us because for us, it's all about, as always, the challenge and the opportunity and that creative challenge. But we're very strategically driven as well, hence the strategy team, always looking to find that sort of secret sauce, that insight, that point of view, that positioning, something that can obviously help that brand and that challenge find that brave place to be to deliver the commercial outcomes ultimately. So yeah, hopefully that's a good kind of roundup of who we are and what we do. I feel like I've got Andrew sitting over there, the founder, kind of like marking my work, but he's not in the room.
It speaks a lot to the agency culture that the founder's just off camera, throwing notes at you and hitting you whenever you don't say the right thing. Tell them about the awards that we've won.
He's definitely not there, but the awards are somewhere over there.
We'll come back to the whole being based in Scotland thing later, because I think there's an interesting angle to that. Being based in Belfast for um, nearly 16 years now, there's an interesting perspective that I think we may share, but we'll get into that later. But first of all, I want to dive into some of the work that you've been involved in, something that you maybe could talk about. I always like to take a project from the brief, from sort of cradle to grave, if you will, from the brief all the way through to the execution. So, is there a piece of work that you're proud of, that went well or even went terribly, that you can talk about? And let's start with a client brief. Was it any good? Was it
Yeah.
useful? Was it a terrible brief? You know, there's a big thing about client briefs being awful. So let's jump into that.
I wanted to choose something that's had arms and legs and has been growing for a while. So this piece of work, it's not just my own. Obviously, there's an agency of people here, and we've been working with this client who are one of the biggest sort of medical healthcare organizations in the world. I can't mention them, unfortunately, for many reasons, but it'll be pretty obvious to work out who they are if you go on our website, even though it doesn't mention it there. They're one of the biggest producers of sort of diabetes products and solutions. And as I say, we've been working with them across the US and Europe for 7 years now, I'd like to say, something like that. So quite a while. The particular challenge they came to us with about 5 years ago was type 1 diabetes is a sort of misunderstood condition, if you like. It's not very visible. There's a lot of stigma around it. And this particular brand, didn't feel that they had the awareness and the sort of positive sentiment that they wanted and needed to be able to kind of release roadmap of brand new, really innovative solutions. Ultimately, I mean, this is the company that created the pacemaker in the 50s. So, you know, these guys are at the forefront of healthcare solutions that are really sort of solving big challenges. It's pretty exciting stuff. That said, the size of this company, they're huge, but they've typically been a sales-led organization. So they've been on a journey with marketing, with brands, and we've been taking them on that journey, which, you know, when you've got a business of 90,000 people, you can imagine that's a bit of a challenge. But this particular team, the diabetes team, they were always kind of the most open to creativity and what it could do. So the problem was really they were looking to generate awareness and perception in the type 1 diabetes community at a brand level, not just at a product level. But we knew we couldn't match their competitors' spend, because some of their competitors, like Dexcom, were spending hundreds of millions of dollars on Super Bowl ads and Jonas Brothers kind of influencer-led campaigns, right? And these guys just weren't used to that level of investment. And we also wanted to kind of connect with the type 1 diabetes community in a kind of meaningful way, in a non kind of salesy product way.
Can I jump in there, Mike, and ask two questions? So firstly, just as a clarifier, for people who maybe don't know a huge amount about type 1 and type 2 diabetes, just if I've got this right, type 2 is the lifestyle one that is brought on by lifestyle factors. Could be eating, drinking, not exercising, whatever. Type 1 is more of a clinical thing that just is genetic, almost. It sort of comes on naturally.
Yeah, do you know what? And that's a really important point, because that's part of it. There's a stigma around type 1 because people believed that, or they didn't know, there was a lack of awareness that, you know, it wasn't because of their lifestyle. It's purely a condition that, you know, can happen to anybody, and you can't cure it as of yet. So yeah, thanks for kind of clarifying that, because that's really important. And the type 1 diabetes community really have felt kind of stigmatized, and that people just don't understand them.
People just assume they're a bit, oh, you've got diabetes, you're just a bit lazy. Yeah. Why don't you just lose some weight? That kind of societal pressure that comes because it's got the diabetes but in the word, and people don't know the nuance to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think still to this day, that is still the challenge, that people, you know, and I think maybe there's a bit more of a rise in terms of that awareness of the difference. But
it's your campaign that's working. That's the thing.
Well, hopefully we've done a little bit towards it. But of course, so as I sort of mentioned earlier, we are very sort of strategically insight-led agency, whether it's brand or a campaign. And so we were looking for that human truth, and we did an awful lot of research. Myself and colleagues and research organizations had a lot of great stuff. And what we found on that sort of journey is that essentially living with T1D, type 1 diabetes, is a relentless condition. You know, it's you're calorie counting, you're finger pricking, it's on your mind day and night. it's forever. It doesn't go away. Bottom line is it was a bit of a life sentence of monotony, but it can kill you. One miscalculation that's really serious. Sort of imagine how you would feel carrying that with you every day. So that was that was huge for us. I mean, as an agency, we didn't have anybody in here with T1D. We didn't have family members, so that was quite a moment for us. And we wanted to create a sort of simple idea that would essentially sort of show the T1D community that we understand them, and also help to sort of change public awareness and change that stigma, if you like. So the sort of solution we came up with was a visual metaphor. It was an invisible condition that people didn't understand. So how could we kind of create something that would help them do that? And if you like, the sort of human truth that sort of landed on is that diabetes is a bit like trying to keep a balloon up in the air every day whilst going about your everyday life, doing everything that you can. You might be able to do it easy enough at first. I didn't bring the balloon, but imagine it here. But eventually it's going to get really, and if trying to do a podcast, trying to swim, trying to have a shower, it becomes impossible. And that's really what life with diabetes is. So visual metaphor was brought to life with a balloon, a blue balloon. The client's brand is blue and a blue balloon, and it creates this sort of visual metaphor and this kind of visual asset. And we brought that to life through a campaign, a social first campaign, and a challenge, like an ALS style sort of activation challenge for people to do and to try out. And that campaign's run for 5 years now. It started off in Europe. It was a Europe-focused campaign. It has gone to the States, wider across Europe. It was always kind of kickstarted with a film, and it turned into a social campaign. And then we would engage, obviously, user-generated stories, heavily through social, and also LinkedIn. Actually, the organization itself is huge. People were doing it on LinkedIn post every year around the World's Diabetes Day. And it's just grown. It's nuts. It's such a beautifully simple visual metaphor that doesn't need language at all. It's pretty clear. The reach it's had is 200 plus million over the last 4 years. It's increased the sentiment towards the brand by over 20%. And I think the main thing, like we heard, is that people in the community, in the T1D community, were like, "This is amazing. You get us." And it's the easiest way I've ever come across to explain what it's like to have type 1 diabetes. So it's sort of turned into this sort of symbol for the brand, but also for the community. And I think the nicest thing is that the community feels it's theirs. And, we're constantly trying to battle with the brand to sort of go, don't try and take over too much, let it live in the community. But yeah, it's a piece of work that we're all proud of. It also won a Guinness Book of Records for the balloon kept up in the air, as you can imagine. It reached the Mexican government. They were standing up using it as an analogy to kind of make a point about T1D in Mexico. It's reached hundreds of thousands of people and millions of people and raised a lot of money for charity as well. So yeah, it's touched everybody in the agency here. Quite often clients come to us and say, can we have a blue balloon? which is a good sign, right? That's a good place to be.
Well, look, I want to go back to the beginning of that campaign then, because there's a lot of interesting things you said I want to dive into.
Yeah.
The first thing is about working with a sales-led organization. I've worked with, probably not a healthcare company size, but I've worked with a lot of organizations that are sales-led. And as a general caricature of those organizations, they understand growth through sales. If we put in one extra rep, that rep will deliver 10x, 20x, 100x, or whatever the multiple is on their salary, on their cost. And we know that, so we can just quite comfortably plan where we're going to go. Marketing, brand building looks like an investment, looks like a cost that doesn't pay off as quickly as putting a sales rep in. So you're always feeling on the back foot, like you have to justify every penny you spend right away. And I'm interested that they came to you for a brand and awareness campaign, not necessarily a sales activation campaign. So was that clear from the outset in the brief that that's what they wanted? Had they done that internal work before they got to you? Or was there still that tension going on between the sort of different parts of the organization when it came to you being involved in this?
Yeah. It's a good question and a good point. Yeah, it's a challenge that I've come across and we come across a lot. And I suppose there's two things we could talk about there. There is a marketing and sales alignment piece, which is a horrible kind of technical term, but it's so critical.
Absolutely true.
But but going back to your sort of other point is like, there was a will with the client team to do something different, and they came to us with the challenge, not the solution in their minds. So that was great, and that's one thing. That's already a massive win. And then I suppose the key thing is that we turned what was a creative analogy and an activation, if you like, into something that then could be an asset for the sales team. And then we looked at how that works from a sort of marketing and sales alignment. So everything we do with this organization specifically always has a sort of sales kind of driven sales enablement pack, if you like, for want of a better term, something that is really selling into them. Now that might just be a PDF, but more often than not, it's a conference. It's it's a series of webinars. It's a little book for them to take away. It's something for them to feel proud about, because they're looking for excuses to engage with their customers in ways that don't feel forced, that don't feel salesy all the time, and that make them look amazing, and help them celebrate what they do. So a lot of what we do, particularly with this client, but other large kind of, sales driven organization, is about baking that in from day one. Utilizing the sales team actually to help us with the insight. And if they can't help us with the insight, to help us find the right people so that we can get those insights, so they feel like they're part of that process. We engage them in the creative process. Sometimes we don't want design by committee, but it's nice for them to feel that they're part of it, and that we've given the tools to have these conversations and the platforms to engage in it. The Blue Balloon Challenge on LinkedIn was huge. And, and for those that are out there, frontline sales, engaging with people, both to clinicians and physicians and to patients, it gave them a way to connect in a kind of more purposeful driven way. And I think then from the marketing and sales alignment piece, we talk about building brands from the inside out. For me, it's always been really, really important to engage as many stakeholders as possible in that. And sales are a huge stakeholder, because we cannot and should not and really cannot continue to be the coloring in department. Marketing should never be seen as that. We're lucky we work in an agency and we get that. But I know there's obviously, there's a lot of people work in the house like I have over the years, and it's a constant battle to sort of position marketing as an investment that drives value. So if as close as you can get to sales and build that relationship, you're always going to be better off.
You're right, that alignment between marketing and sales, when it feels like the teams are sat at opposite ends of the room throwing stuff at each other, it never really works, and it just becomes a blame game. But when they do work out that actually we're all trying to achieve the same thing, and look, there's always going to be a little bit of tension, but no, it sounds like you've nailed that bit well. So jumping into the next bit that really caught my eye was the talk about the research and how you develop the insights. You talked about this being a European-wide campaign, hitting the US as well. So how did you take the temperature of all the different T1D communities? Was this focus groups? Was this existing research? Was this, how did that process work? And did you find any interesting things across different countries? Or was this one of those lovely times when actually everyone's experience was the same, no matter what language they spoke?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, Will, I wasn't involved in the research in the first year. I kind of came into it later on, but it was an agency-wide challenge for sure. We spoke to people Europe-wide in different countries. Actually, some of our clients were people that living with T1D as well. So they gave us their own insights. They're a large organization, so they have a lot of existing primary research through global research agencies. They're always doing sort of brand tracking, which, kind of always kind of put on the end of it, an element of that understanding the patients and the clinicians and the physicians' needs. So it's, they've always invested heavily. In fact, you would get hit 20, 30, 40, 100-page documents. So synthesizing that information was always a job. Doing some primary research with our own partners, was something that we would do through focus groups. But actually, more often than not, we found the richest stuff is when we could have those one-to-one conversations. So my colleague Ross, that originally worked on this, he had 20, 30, 40 conversations with people across Europe. And instead of trying to find a common theme that sort of pulled them all together, actually it pushed them apart because everybody. So I just brushed the mic there. This is how often I do podcasts. Such an amateur. Did it again. Everybody with type 1 diabetes, it's so different for everybody. So, we kind of went wide before we could come in, and that's ultimately, I know some of you people that have attended this, they talk about human truths, insights. Everybody likes to have a different view on it. They are ridiculously hard things to get. Sometimes you'll never get one in your entire career. I do think this is probably one of the strongest ones as an agency that I've ever, kind of come across in my career. That, ultimately it is boring and monotonous, and it's invisible as well, and it can kill you. And how that sort of manifested itself into that sort of creative metaphor, for me, is the most beautiful thing. That's why I wanted to talk about it, even though it's not my project as such. As an agency, it's one of the most beautiful kind of things we've done.
Because healthcare, my limited exposure to working in healthcare, which is one client many years ago, because regulations change by country, by geography, sometimes product names have to change for various reasons in different places. The whole healthcare sector works entirely differently in the UK compared to the Republic of Ireland, compared to you go to the US and everything you think you know turns upside down. So sometimes finding a common thread that can work across all those geographies is really quite difficult, which is why when you started talking
Yeah.
about the campaign, I was like, you found something that works across all these markets because it focuses on the person more than the product.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that they come to us, because we elevate beyond products and features, which is obviously always something you should do, but to connect with human beings. First and foremost, their purpose is to extend lives and to improve lives and all of those great things. That's individuals. That's it's not so. It's always about pulling up to that brand level, and as soon as you're talking in a more emotive way, and you're not talking about products, then you can remove the regulatory shackles and the challenges with the advertising standards and claims, which is a hard place to be, and we work in that space as well. But
Yeah, it's hugely difficult, isn't it? In med, I mean, you work in alcohol as well, and it's tricky in alcohol, but it's a different level of tricky when you get in medical, isn't it?
absolutely, and it is just we're lucky that a lot of the work we do is at a brand level. So it's talking about outcomes, it's talking about people and emotions. It's not talking about clinical sort of clinical outcomes, or kind of the efficacy of the drug.
This also then leads nicely into my next question, because you said about the balloon is blue, which represents and ties it into your client's brand.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But you also mentioned that there's this sort of constant tension with the client about them not over owning it and letting this live in the community.
The answer to that really is that it is owned by the brand, and they want it to be synonymous with their brand, but it's not directly linked to a sell. So it's purposeful. The community feels that that the brand sees them, and that they're doing something about it at a public level in Europe and the US. So I think we and the client have managed to strike that right. But yes, that it's always had to be a little bit of a tug and war on that, for sure.
Look, we had Magda Nenins-Thiel on from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute at the end of the last series, who talks, her latest work is about growing categories versus growing brands, which is really important for category leaders, maybe even the second in the category as well. Because if you're in a category and you can expand that, if you've got 40% of a category and you expand the category and you keep your 40%, you've actually grown sales without stealing market share of anybody else. So ideas like this that it is a tension for brands, undoubtedly, but if it can live in the community and grow, if it uses your brand color, a competitor's never going to try and jump on this campaign. So there is a tension, and I know brands often do want to own the thing, but actually, just letting the community run with it is quite interesting. So no, I love it. I love the idea, and I love that it's made a difference to people within the T1D community, which is fantastic. And what the aim of what we do, isn't it, as marketers, is to try and affect the people we're trying to reach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, so it's a really lovely one that it's we feel passionate about, and it's nice to share.
Couple of years ago, I had James Hayhurst on, who runs the Magic Source course, which is a program about getting agencies and clients working better together. This isn't an ad for James, by the way. I just find it a really fascinating question to ask. You've worked both sides of the agency client schism, if we want to call it that, and you work with a lot of different clients in different sectors, some regulated industries, some not, all that sort of stuff. What would you say are maybe the one, two, or three things that are really critical to clients getting the best out of an agency who they're working with? They're paying to get great work from, they're working with them closely, they're trying to achieve their goals through an agency. But there's a feeling, I think, in the agency world particularly, that clients don't always get agencies, and there's probably a feeling with clients that agencies don't get clients. So what are the couple of things that work well in your experience to make that agency client better?
I'd love to see all the answers as well, and read all the answers from your other guests. Actually, I need to watch them all. But you think about why you come to an agency. You come to an agency because if you're a large organization, you've probably got some form of marketing resource. You might even have creative resource. But, you want something different, or you want something that, kind of pushes the envelope or is braver or whatever. For some organizations, they just don't have that function at all. And they don't understand it at all, and they need your expert sort of help and support. And there's everything in the middle. But I think one of the things that clients do, and I've been a client, and you'd think as a reformed agency consultant that you'd be the best client ever as well, but I still fell into the trap, is that I was giving them the solution. I said, I believe it's this, now go and produce that. And the best clients that we work with give us the problem or the challenge at a business level or at a marketing level, at a commercial level. Sometimes it's right up the tree. It's a real brand awareness or perception challenge for a global brand. Sometimes it's more, kind of commercially marketing led around funnel, around leads, around prospects, but they give us that challenge. They don't tell us what the solution is in their minds. So that's the kind of first thing, which I think is pretty critical. The second thing is, if you're coming to an agency, you're buying creativity, strategically led creativity, and the worst thing you can do is try and hem that in. That's the third time I've hit the mic. The worst thing you can do is hit the mic 3 times. So
you win a prize if you do.
Yeah, good. What is it? What do I get? But yeah, so the best work as a client, the best work should push you. The best work should make you feel a bit uncomfortable. It should push you out your comfort zone, because those agencies have seen what bland looks like, and they know what, kind of is going to push the needle in your industry and your market. And of course, there's a scale, right? How far you're going to go with it, but you should feel like you've been pushed. You shouldn't feel like you're pushing. So have that open mind, and be prepared to be a bit scared, because that's where the best work comes from. And I guess the third one, budget. It's the biggest bugbear of anybody in an agency. You ask what the budget is, and the client goes, I don't know. It's not because we want to take all your money. It's because we want some sort of like constraint of reality, because that's where often some of the best creative and strategic thinking comes from. A constraint. There's always a constraint. We know there is. There's never a never-ending pot of money. So if you give us a reality of a budget, and it could be, I've got this bit, and if you did something amazing, I could get a bit more. But just let's be real with each other, because it stops that silly dance, which is exhausting, right?
It is, and pointless. The analogy I used to use when I was agency side was, it's a bit, what you're doing at the minute is coming and saying, I want to buy a car. That's what you're doing by not giving me the budget. It's like, okay, do you want a Ferrari or do you want a Nissan Micra? Which is it? Yeah. Oh, because they're both cars. Yeah. I need to know where this lands. Is it a Ford Focus? Is it the Range Rover? There's a lot in between a Ferrari and a Nissan Micra. And I need to know roughly what car garage you want to go into. Oh, right. And I did once say that to a client who then said, yeah, okay, no, I get what you're trying to say. And you're like, great. So, where do you think the budget is? And he just looked me in the eye and went, like Nissan Qashqai. And I was like, it was a fucking metaphor. I don't know what you're. I'm like, so do you mean like 40 grand over 5 years? Or do you, I don't know. I mean, it's like, oh, mate. But then you realize that was my fault, not his fault. I thought
Yeah.
I'd got through and I hadn't. But anyway, it was a lovely moment, which I remember dearly.
But I mean, that's quite good though. Even if it's a cash guy, there's an entry level, and there's the top of the range, and then you've got something to work with, right? We know you can always invest more to get more, not just from a creative point of view, but in terms of how it activates. And I think that's the thing, So yeah, just give us a budget, please, because it just makes it so much more. It's fun. It's more fun as well, even if the budget's tight. We'll tell you if we can't work with it or not. But I do think that constraint just helps to drive creativity, and it doesn't strain the relationship.
No, absolutely. So, do you think the briefs are any good from client? Not naming a particular client, but when you see a brief, you must see a number across a year. If you had to sort of put them into different pots, how many of those briefs would you say are outstanding? How many are pretty good? How many are don't know what to do with that. So, are clients any good at writing briefs? That's the question.
We think about briefs in sort of two different ways, I suppose. There's a client brief, and then there's a creative brief. I don't think clients should be, and they aren't, any good at writing creative briefs. That's the job of the agency. And I'm speaking as a representative, somebody who works in an agency that has a strategy function, we have client services function, we've got creatives, etc. So we've got enough people as well to get that brief to that stage. And that's very much, writing a creative brief and Made Brave is very much kind of with the strategy team. It's an art form, really, one that I'm still trying to perfect, to be honest with you, to inspire creativity, to bridge that gap. Where I think, clients for us is about kind of giving us that initial agency brief, that kind of, what is the challenge and the problem? How many people are good at that? I would say about 20%. A written and verbal brief, a bit of both. You need a bit of both because nothing that you ever write down, you always say something else verbally that like goes, oh, secret sauce, there it is. A written and a verbal brief delivered together, 20+% of our clients give us really good solid stuff to go with. And others just don't want to, they want us to do it for them. And that's all right, because we know that relationship, they want to, some people want to just sit and talk for 2 hours. Some people just want to talk for 15 minutes and expect you to get it. Others want to do a written brief and have that kind of session. Sometimes you want to do a tissue session. It sounds really old now, like a kind of ideation or tissue session, and where you've got 5 people in a room. So briefs sort of take quite a few different forms for us, and we tend to work with our clients the way they want to work. It's a tough one to say they're shit or they're great because they're all quite different. Sounds like a politician's answer. God's sake. But yeah, I think it's this age-old thing, isn't it? And I think we should think about them as client briefs and creative briefs. They're two quite different things. Talking about from a strategist point of view, we're looking for that point of clarity and that point of kind of tension and that spark that we can then give the creative team to get the best work. That's so different than a brief that's talking about a marketing or business challenge, and the sort of scope and deliverables of what they would like us to work on, really. So.
And maybe there is a touch point before the brief comes through, which is often the pitch stage. And I'm always interested in finding out at agencies how pitching works and who leads on new business. Because one thing I've noticed over the last 10, 15 years that I've been working and sort of moving into strategy is that as soon as you start doing strategy, in an agency, if they don't have someone whose just sole job is new business, that lands squarely on your head. You're like, oh, right, your strategy, you're also new business. Is that how it works at Made Brave, or do you have a new business team? Where do you get involved in new business and pitching?
Yeah, it's pretty fluid. We're 20, 25 people or so. So it's kind of, we have a head of new business. We've got a client experience director who heads up the client services team, and so it's a mixture of those, and there's always a strategist involved. There's 3 strategists, Mark, myself, Robbie. There's always one of us that are part of that pitch process. It will be headed up by head of new business or even Andrew, the founder. or our head of client experience. So we tend to sort of have a team of two or three that would lead, and then everybody in the agency inputs, but you'd have one point person. And it just depends. Sometimes it's pure strategy work, and it just needs me, or it needs Mark, a strategist. Sometimes it's pure creative that doesn't actually ever need to touch strategy, which is kind of rare at Made Brave, but that would go through one of the client services teams with the head of new business. So it's kind of horses for courses, really. Pretty much everybody's going to see new business at some point now. We're a kind of an accessible team. We like to engage with clients with as much as possible the team they're going to be working with. It's not like you've just got a pitch team and then it's handed off. There's no juniors at Made Brave. We're all getting old.
The last person I interviewed, he was talking about that, how the pitch team are the delivery team, the people you talk with, the people you're working with. One of the things we also talked about was strategy as part of new business, because sometimes you see it in the pitch process where it's like, almost like the questions they ask, you're like, yeah, but we'll need to do the strategy to answer those. And that's actually a paid bit of work on the other side of you saying yes. Do you get that? And how do you deal with that tension when, to get through in a pitch stage for a bit of business that you want, you're almost having to do the strategy for free?
Pitching is part of what we have to do. Unfortunately, it's not changing any day. There's different tactics you can take to try and kind of derail the pitch or change it or kind of, steer it. But sometimes you've just got to follow the process. If it's a creative pitch where you've got to do some work that's to show your indicative thoughts and skills and outputs, then we need to do some indicative strategy based, and do the planning and the insights for it, which is almost like doing the work. There's pitches where you've put in tens, maybe hundreds of hours into to win the work, and often, and hopefully more often than not, it's worth it. But then there are sort of pitches where we see more often than not that there's less and less creative pitches these days that I see at a mid-level client and project, which is kind of nice to see, but they're still looking for some initial thoughts, a little bit of thinking. And I think that's all right, because we're in a sort of consultative business. And we don't just do cookie cutter style kind of widgets that we sell. It's it's a bespoke sort of expert specialist service. So I think a little bit like architects would not give away a plan, but they would maybe start to do a sketch, or they'd be talking about what could happen or how it could look or a concept of it. I think we've got to show a little bit of leg. It's just trying to find that balance. And we don't always get it right. Quite often in those types of pitches, it is just about, we've looked at your industry, we've looked at your challenge, we've looked at the competitive space, and here's this is interesting. It'd be great to look at that. Might be wrong, but we think it's interesting. So it's just a point of view, and it's indicative. The pitches where you pitch and it's like they're either going to buy it or they don't buy it, they're really not my favorite, to be honest. I find that quite horrific. But sometimes you just got to jump through those hoops. What do you say?
So I want to talk for a minute just about Glasgow and what a great city it is, and being based there, and what challenges that presents, but also what opportunities. Because you said right at the beginning, we do a lot of work outside Scotland, outside the UK as well. Is that a challenge being based in Glasgow?
I don't see it as a barrier at all. I think it's a positive in so many ways. I'm English. I'm from Yorkshire. I think you are as well. Are you, Andy? Are you?
Bradford.
Bradford, yeah. I'm from Leeds, so there we go. I've been up here for 20-odd years, 20-something years now, and Glasgow is a great city. It's a vibrant city. It's a creative city. It's a music city. There's a lot going on. So, it's a great place to be based as a creative agency, as an organisation. And then, yes, there's only so much work in Scotland. Scotland is about 5.5 million people. That's sort of half the population of London. Across the whole of Scotland, I think, so there's a good core of about 15, 20 agencies of note, if you like, and then, a longer tail of smaller and freelance. And it became quite clear to many agencies that, to have that growth, then you need to look out with Scotland, right? And there's a lot of great clients and a lot of great businesses in Scotland, and we do work in the Scottish scene. But when Andrew started the agency all those years ago, he made a point of kind of not just playing nice with the creative community, but actually engaging with the entrepreneurial and the business community. not just in Scotland, but also with the organizations that take you further afield. So he did, a lot of trade missions, a lot of things with Scottish government and Scottish enterprise and these sorts of things to sort of get the Made Brave sort of network growing and sort of build out Scotland. So we've always known that the sort of style of work we want to do, the kind of size of the work and some of the growth ambitions we've had, you need to look out with, and so much of the work, I do work with clients in the US. Some clients I've never met physically, it's all just done through Teams. They barely meet because they're all over the country in the US. We work with clients all over Europe. We get to meet them once a month, once a quarter. So people don't care, I don't think, anymore. The idea, sometimes there are clients that really want that face-to-face. They want to be sitting across the desk from you twice a week, 3 times a week. And that's cool. We're not going to be sort of going, and we're not going to be in London 4 days a week, kind of doing that kind of work. But yeah, I think for the most part, people are excited by the idea of working with an SME from a creative city that've got a bit of grit about them, and don't see kind of distance, particularly in the UK or Europe, as a thing. It's just all on the merit of your work and your skills and your ability.
Yep, love that. Absolutely love it. And long may it continue for all of those of us who work outside of London. So love it. Just as a wrap-up question then, Mike, what resource or book, podcast, whatever would you recommend to people if they wanted to know more about anything, really? I
was trying to watch as many of your podcasts as possible to sort of go, right, don't want to repeat anything that anybody said. If I was at home in my home office, I'd be pulling out the book just now. But I just bought Hacking the Human Mind, which is a behavioral science book that sort of gives you the science behind 17 different brands by Richard Shotton and Michael Aaron Flicker. Do you know what? I like books that are accessible. I've got all the heavy reading books, and they're the books that you have to read 4 times to get. The kind of, but I like the kind of accessible to easy takeaway. So, Hacking the Human Mind, sort of behavioral science behind 17 world's best brands. Really enjoy that.
Great recommendation, because with a fair wind and a little bit of luck, Richard should be on this podcast before the end of the series. So the hamsters are working behind the scenes to try and make that happen. So good recommendation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. Somebody else I sort of follow, and you know what? I hadn't actually bought his book, but I read everything else he does. Is Alex Smith, No Bullshit Strategy. And so if you look up Alex Smith, he's written a book called No Bullshit Strategy. It's not just about creative strategy or kind of marketing strategy. It's about business strategy. And he's got a newsletter called The Hidden Path. And I really like his musings, to be honest. He's got a kind of practical, no nonsense, no bullshit approach to it. And I'm not a fan of fluff and bullshit. So he appeals to me an awful lot.
Brilliant. Well, look, links to both of those, to Richard's book and to No Bullshit Strategy, are in the show notes. So, Mike, Brooke, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Andy. It's been great to chat.